Hey, this is Resilience Radio, episode 10 with Lisa Mase on holistic nutrition. I'm Irvin Eisenberg, host of the show and owner of Resilience Occupational Therapy. The opinions on this show are not necessarily shared by me. I like to showcase a variety of perspectives, and not every perspective is going to resonate with you. Additionally, none of the opinions are meant to be medically diagnostic or prescriptive in any way. You should seek out your own healthcare practitioner for that. Today's guest is Lisa Mase. She's a holistic nutritionist, mindfulness coach, food as medicine educator, food sovereignty activist, folk herbalist, homesteader, and professional translator. Good to have you on today, Lisa.
Thanks for having me, Irvin.
So I want to know if we could get started with the listeners getting to know you a little better. Could you tell us a little about yourself and your hobbies, passions, or anything else?
Absolutely. I was born and raised in Italy, and our grandmother was an incredible teacher to us. We always were homesteading with her, foraging for mushrooms and medicinal herbs in the forest, in the Dolomite Mountains of Italy, and preparing food, whether it was hardtack rye bread or sausage or jam that we were going to store in the root cellar, or a meal, a soup, fish, grains for that particular day's eating. We were, constantly learning about the cycle of the seasons, about nourishment, and about health through these simple practices that we, as 14 cousins, all helped her with. Um, and I think that foundational experience really brought me to the way that I choose to live today. I feel really grateful to have landed in Vermont and grateful that I have access to land. I am an immigrant and a colonizer. I live on occupied Abenaki land. And part of my reparations work around that has been working with the Abenaki Seeds of Renewal project, which is a project to help Abenaki folks reclaim all of their indigenous seeds and grow them out to create an indigenous only seed bank. So um, I'm really passionate about our land being a community space, not only for people in our community to come together and harvest food, take what they need, prepare meals, but also for Indigenous and BIPOC folks to have access to land and use it as they see fit. So that's something that I guess I would call, not only a hobby, but kind of a mindset and a way of living. And I feel so grateful that we can walk through the woods on our land, that my children can have the opportunity to connect with land in this way. And when we're not living in heightened viral times, I am a traveler. Our parents really raised us to travel quite a bit and to see the world as our teacher. And I so appreciate having the opportunity to land back in Vermont as a wonderful route and a place of grounding, and also learn from the world and give that opportunity to my children, of course, when the time is right.
So that's a really rich background you're coming from with this. And it sounds like you're doing so many different things. Can you give us an overview of the work you do?
Absolutely. I, prior to pandemic times, was teaching quite a bit in the community about food as medicine and about food sovereignty, right? What it means to really have control over our food, whether that means having access to land and the capacity to garden, or whether that means not letting corporations cook for us and being able to choose our culturally appropriate foods, the foods of our heritage. So, doing a lot of teaching in local high schools, senior centers, and community mental health agencies around these topics. Now I'm not in person teaching groups, and I know that that time will return. In the meantime, I'm working one on one with folks who are trying to transform their health. I work quite a bit with folks who have been pushed around by the medical community and haven't really found an answer, so to speak, for what's going on with them and what a clear path is towards health and well-being. And I think that that's more and more prevalent in our culture just because the allopathic community tends to treat symptoms, which is certainly one approach. And I work via root causes and identifying what are all the causes and conditions in your life specific to you that have brought you to this moment in time where you're experiencing these symptoms. And how can we use that as a path to trace back to find out what's going on the inside, where your organ systems are out of balance. So I'm doing that work one-on-one with folks quite a bit right now. And my hope really in doing that work is to make myself obsolete. I try to provide clients with the tools and the knowledge that they need to maintain their own sort of unique rhythm, because health is a changing state of balance, right? It's not as though one day, we lift up a rock and look underneath and we find our health and there it is, and then we have it forever, right? It's always changing. And so how can more and more people be empowered to have the tools that they need to understand the messages that their body is giving to them for nourishment, for healing, and act upon those and feel like they don't have to go to a doctor or a healthcare professional every time they're wondering, why are things changing? What's going on? What are the root causes? And above and beyond that, I'm also starting to teach some classes online, which is really exciting. And I am just now putting together a free webinar series. And the first one is about surprising strategies for staying healthy this winter. Some strategies that I learned as we first dipped into the pandemic in March that I really want to share with folks that are powerful and preventative, that are about not only what we put into our bodies, but what we surround ourselves with and how the rhythm of our days supports us. So I'm really excited about that webinar series. I'm excited about the course that I'm going to launch. And hopefully, just as you're doing with this podcast, I'll be able to offer more support for folks to feel that sense of self-empowerment around health and well-being.
So, could you speak to us a little bit about what healthy eating looks like?
Absolutely. It's a vast compendium of pieces that to me form a mosaic of who we each are. And healthy eating to me includes some sort of connection to our sources of nourishment, whether it's connecting with local farms and farmers, growing some of our own food, connecting with our ancestral foods. Um, Whatever that means to you, having some connection to sources of nourishment. Because I do think that that inspires a way of eating that is more rhythmic and in alignment with the seasons. To me, healthy eating really also means understanding who your ancestors are and what they ate. I think this is a true radical act of food justice as well, because the more we understand about who we are in terms of where we come from, the more we can be respectful of other folks and other ways of being, other ways of eating. And this, in my mind, creates a more just and equitable society. So, the foods that are actually ideal for us to be eating and most digestible for us are literally pre programmed into our DNA. So, understanding that, my ancestors were from many different parts of Europe, and tracing back the root whole foods that they ate and appreciating those as part of my diet is what has helped me be well, especially after suffering from 10 years of chronic intestinal parasites and healing myself with food and herbs. I really understood on a deeper level this concept of ancestral eating as a part of healthy eating. And I think healthy eating is not only about what we physically put into our bodies, but how we put that into our bodies, right? So we all know that it doesn't feel as great to eat on the run as it does to eat sitting down. And that's because we have an enteric nervous system, right? Nervous system that lives in our gut and that produces millions of neurotransmitters that secrete the hormones that we need, not only for energy, but also to trigger either the fight or flight sympathetic nervous system response or the rest and digest parasympathetic response. So when we're not able to sit, take a deep breath. In so many traditional cultures, my own included, we light a candle and say some kind of a prayer, offer gratitude before a meal. This is all an opportunity to pause, to slow down, to create a transition between whatever was happening before and the time of eating. And I've studied quite a bit with Dr. Vasant Lad, who runs the Ayurvedic Institutes both in India and in New Mexico. Um, and he explains that his mom, who was his primary and first cooking teacher, would always bathe before she went into the kitchen and then light a candle and say a prayer before she started cooking. And then she would feed the whole family and be, up and about getting different dishes ready and warm and to the table and on everyone's plates. And then after everybody was done eating and had left the eating space, she would sit down, light her own candle, and eat in peace and quietly. And this is often advice that I share with parents of young children, myself included, because mealtime can be really chaotic with little people. And sometimes it can feel a lot more soothing or relaxing to sit and have my own meal right before a family meal or right after a family meal as time allows. So, healthy eating is not only about what we're putting into our bodies, but how we're putting it into our bodies, right? Because unless we have that ability to be calm and centered, relax the enteric nervous system, we're not going to digest and assimilate our food properly. The whole process of metabolism relies heavily on the nervous system and on muscular impulses that are unconscious. Um, so, healthy eating is also about being present with food, right? There's a really famous study um, done with monks in Nepal who have basically only ever eaten rice and mung beans and vegetables their entire lives. And they're fed McDonald's for a week. Their complete blood count is taken right before and right after the experiment. And just as with their mung beans and rice and vegetables, they pray over the McDonald's and give thanks for the hamburger and french fries and the milkshake, and they eat it 3 meals a day. No change in their complete blood count 1 week later. And
Wow.
that's not to say just if you pray over your McDonald's, you can eat it every day. Not at all. What that really indicates is likely, had they continued in this way, there would have been a change in, perhaps their lipid profile in their blood. But the power of intention is so strong that they were able to metabolize that food, not ever even having eaten animal food before, and be okay. And so that really speaks to healthy eating as a gateway into being healthy overall, having a stronger immune system, reducing inflammation. We all eat every day, right? If we don't eat, we die. So healthy eating is also, I think, a part of being healthy overall. And when the system eats foods that are whole, as close to nature as possible and as tied to the seasons as possible, then the system is more resilient and can naturally tolerate an insult when one comes along, right? Like maybe I identify that there are foods for me that I love, but that are triggering, like corn or soybeans. And I say, well, every once in a while, I'm going to have some tempeh. Every once in a while, I'm going to make cornbread. And because I'm caring for my system by eating these whole foods, cooked with love, eaten within the season, I'm eating them in a calm way. I can tolerate that little bit of insult to my system and sort of move on. So I think that's, kind of an overview of the mosaic of healthy eating. And that is to say, really, that it's personal, right? And even our balance of macronutrients and micronutrients is personal and individual and has to do with our constitution that comes through via our heritage and ancestry. And it also has to do with conditions, right? What kinds of conditions are we living in? Where are we living? Urban or rural? What's happening in the world? Is it a pandemic? Are we experiencing low grade chronic stress? Or, is it a golden age? Is there peace where we're living, right? All of these factors. Are there environmental pollutants and toxins that we are exposed to on a day to day basis or not? All of these different bits and pieces, I think, create the holistic picture of healthy eating, which is unique to each one of us.
Wow, there's so much rich information you just shared there. Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm thinking about how you've touched on culture a few times and individual culture and the environment you're in. It seems like there's so many factors you're balancing. When you're working with someone, what's your process for, I, I'm guessing you're not doing a 23andMe DNA ancestry on people. Not that that wouldn't potentially be useful, but I'm guessing it's more nuanced than that. What's your your interview process and your way of helping tailor to someone's individual historical culture and current culture?
absolutely. I start usually with folks. Often with a quick check in phone call to say, what's going on for you? How can I be of support? What are your goals? Um, and if it seems like a good match and we choose to work together, we begin with a deep dive intake, which I call a health story. And so folks usually start by completing a form that allows them to tell me their story. And within that are questions about um, grandparents. What do you know about your grandparents? Where did they come from? What was their health like, in as far as you might know? What about your parents? And often this sends folks down um, kind of a curious and often joyful reconnection with some of their family members, asking some of these questions and getting a little bit more background information, which then we discuss and creates kind of an overall picture of what's going on, right? I'm also asking questions about, what is your work life looking like right now? What is your home life looking like? What are some things that you do every day? What are some of the rhythms, things that repeat for you, whether it's, on a daily basis or on a weekly basis? Whether that's centered around things that you do, things that you eat, things that are on your schedule. So diving into all of those different pieces helps me to kind of slowly get a picture. I'm also asking about, what times of day do you feel most vibrant or most tired? And what's a time of life that you can remember where you felt really good, really energized, right? To also help people kind of envision their future self, and envision, you know, this is where I'm going, right? And where perhaps there's been stagnancy because often with, not feeling clear about what to eat or not feeling in balance in the body, there's a sense of dis-ease, right? And so we want to create ease, and that often means creating flow, right? So creating flow can often start with recalling a time of feeling really well, really balanced, really joyful, and then thinking about, what do I want to manifest? What is my future self? What does that look like 6 months from now? And that's a really wonderful deep dive beginning into kind of an ongoing conversation. I tend to work with folks for a minimum of 3 months, often will extend into 6 months or 9 months. And as I said, I do try to make myself obsolete, and I'm always here, to provide support.
I'm struck by the overlaps between what you're describing and the scope of occupational therapy. That you're taking what in the OT world we might refer to as an occupational profile, um, and while feeding is one thing we might focus on, we might not focus specifically on the diet end of things. It's really the what are the meaningful activities people are doing, and the when and how are they doing them, and trying to make make life more easeful would be one
Yes.
of the those goals. Um, I'm curious to get your take on some of the more fad diets, and in particular the paleo diet, because I feel like that it's often lauded as this is historically what we ate during this specific period of time, and there's both some interesting dogma around it as well as some very useful pieces of it. So I'll would like to just speak to that a little bit.
Absolutely. So I like to say that for every processed food out there, there is a fad diet to kind of counterbalance it or offer an antidote. And I say that because I feel like they're one and the same, right? They're trying to take something that's whole and that comes from nature, which is both human beings and the food that we consume, because we all are the earth. We're all connected, right? All the plants, all the animals, all of the beings. Trying to take those whole creations and sort of separate them, right? And I think that this is a big issue and actually a big reason that people are sick, is this quintessential disconnect from nature that human beings are experiencing. And so I think that a huge part of health actually is being connected to nature, whether it's to your house plant or to the forest. And so with that, we have all these diet related diseases, right, in the United States: obesity, heart disease, diabetes, all of these diet related diseases that are really taking folks down. And lo and behold, people who are more at risk for contracting SARS-CoV-2 or coronavirus do already have a pre existing condition like a diet related disease. I don't think there's any mistake there. And with that, all of these fad diets are trying to counterbalance the processed foods that have led people to develop these diseases, right? It's not people's faults, really. They're victims of a capitalist food culture. If you've ever read the book written by New York Times editor Michael Moss called Salt, Sugar, Fat, it's really disturbing to hear him interviewing CEOs and hear the CEO of the company that makes Lunchables say, well, I would never feed a Lunchable to my grandkids. That stuff isn't food, right? But you can't expect me to compromise my bottom line. Of course, I've seen the numbers and I see what these heavily salted and sweetened processed foods do to children, but you can't expect me to compromise my bottom line, right? And so that's what's going on here, right? A corporation is this body, corpore, that's not supposed to be a body because it's not alive. And so processed food is dehumanizing us. And fad diets are an attempt to respond to that, to swing the pendulum back, but they're swinging the pendulum too far because we can't eat in accordance with a specific fad diet for the long haul and expect to be well. Not only because of what I have been saying, which is that health is a changing state of balance, and our diet needs to change in a correlation with who we are as changing humans, but also because many of these ways of eating are high intensity. I would say the same thing for the Paleolithic diet and the ketogenic diet as I would for macrobiotic diet or a Chinese five element or an Ayurvedic diet, right? For me, my inherent cultural diet is the Mediterranean diet, right? But I live in Vermont, so I can't actually totally eat the Mediterranean diet because it's not locally available to me and because there's a much colder, harsher winter here. And I need some foods that are more rich and nutrient dense to sustain me during that cold time, right? So balancing conditions and constitution. Similarly, I think something like the Paleolithic diet can be appropriate for a period of time, just like an Ayurvedic diet, like a Khichdi cleanse, if you can tolerate rice and legumes. Just like a ketogenic diet, if you are an athlete and trying to maximize your performance. I don't recommend it for weight loss. But the period of time is this therapeutic moment. If you even read sort of the classic food as medicine tome, Paul Pitchford, Healing with Whole Foods. Paul Pitchford is vegan, right? He doesn't eat any animal foods at all. However, even he, adamant vegan, in his tome explains for therapeutic reasons, somebody who is extremely malnourished due to illness could benefit from eating organic beef liver and drinking chicken broth, right? So, therapeutic use of foods for a period of time to restore a balance, I think can be appropriate. And there are times specifically when somebody is having an imbalance of gut flora. So, whether gut flora has migrated from its proper home in the large intestine up into the small intestine, whether somebody has, taken too many antibiotics, or maybe it's tracing back to the fact that they weren't breastfed or they weren't born vaginally. Um, Doing a therapy that is somewhat Paleolithic, that cuts out grains and legumes. When somebody's trying to reverse an autoimmune condition, like Hashimoto's thyroiditis, like lupus, like multiple sclerosis, an intensive period of not eating grains and legumes can be appropriate. It can be appropriate for something like reversing histamine intolerance as well. It can help with certain forms of inflammation. And with that being said, the longer we take that kind of insoluble fiber from whole grains and legumes out of our diets, the less our colon is able to process and extract the water from that insoluble fiber. And the more our colon actually starts to shrink in length, so that if we eat something like the Paleolithic diet style of eating, um, which is also specifically very meat heavy, for more than a couple of years, we're finding that reintroducing grains specifically, but also legumes, can be extremely challenging. And some people aren't able to fully restore that balance, right? So I wouldn't ever want anybody to eat a specific way for such a long period of time to the exclusion of other foods, right? This isn't cultivating a system that is resilient and can tolerate insult and can tolerate eating, unusual things every once in a while and bounce back and still feel well. Um, so I think fad diets are there for a reason because processed food exists and they do have a therapeutic role. I think when the human race was hunting and gathering, we were quite different than we are now, in terms of brain development, in terms of life expectancy. Um, for so many reasons, we were quite different, right? So I think our bodies and our digestive systems and our livers have really adapted to industrialized society and food, in a way that doesn't make them the best match for the Paleolithic diet long term. Therapeutically, however, for some period of time, I think that it can be a good approach.
So I feel like we've covered a lot of territory, and the there aren't many quick fixes. It seems that there really is. There really is. It seems like diet is really about behavior and and historic culture and current culture and the physical climate you're in. Um, and you really help people be aware of that and sort of develop a program and and habits and routines around that. Um, with that said, do you have any concrete advice for people that sort of more universal truths that are likely to be useful to everyone, sort of easy takeaways beyond the more complex that we could um, close things off with?
Definitely. First and foremost, listen to your body. And that may sound simple, but it's quite a profound practice, right? There are many healthcare providers out there who have ideas about what might be best for you, what might help you to really feel well and feel in balance. However, your body is your first and foremost and ultimate teacher. So the more you can practice deep breathing, practice nasal breathing, where your exhale is longer than your inhale to really get you into the parasympathetic rest and digest mode. And then listen, really pay attention. Often the first thing that a body cries out for is breath, right? What's the first thing a child does when it's born? It takes a breath, right? And then it screams. And I really believe breath is our first source of nourishment. And it's also the doorway into understanding what kind of nourishment, food wise, is going to be ideal for you. Second source of nourishment, water, right? We are so very much comprised of water. So the more that you can think about drinking 2 quarts of water a day, more or less depending on size and activity, of course, but having that as a bit of a rule of thumb, have a quart mason jar on your counter. Try to fill it once. Have 2 quart mason jars. Fill them up in the morning and try to have them be empty at night. I think that can be so supportive in conjunction with listening and saying, okay, what's going on? Trying to pay attention to when you eat, how you're feeling after you eat. Am I feeling tired? Likely I have combined too many foods and my body is working overtime to try to digest them all. So trying to think of creating a plate where, half of your plate is vegetables, right? And then you're thinking of animal foods as a condiment, right? As much as can fit in the palm of your hand. Um, and of course, I'd say more than that for different kinds of life stages, a growing child or a pregnant person or somebody who's in convalescence, right? And then thinking about also having some kind of whole grain on your plate and making sure you're getting good quality fats. If you're going to be eating animal food, if you're going to be eating fat, make sure it's organic, make sure it's grass fed. If it's not organic, the source. You trust the source, right? This is what's making our brain function, what's making our joints function, what's helping reduce inflammation in our body. Fats and animal foods is so crucial to have those be high quality. And in terms of fruits and veggies, look at the environmental working groups list of the dirty dozen and the clean 15 and say, okay, these dirty dozen fruits and veggies are ones that really uptake a ton of pesticides, right? And I don't really want pesticides in my body. Because they disrupt the hormones, they're endocrine disruptors, because they can cause brain fog, because they can cause digestive distress. So these are the ones I'm really going to focus on buying organically, right? And the other is the clean 15. Okay, I can buy those conventionally if that's the best thing for my budget, and just be aware of peeling them. So a few simple things: deep breathing and body listening. Um, Slowing it down, drinking water, and trying to really think about the quality of the food we're eating and diverting some of the income that we might be spending on who knows what, so many other things in our lives, right? I know that many of us are not eating out right now or not even getting takeout. And how can we think of that money that we might have spent in those realms and put it toward a little bit more high quality food. I think those are some really strong core tenets of using food as medicine.
Wow. Well, thanks for coming on today, Lisa.
Absolutely.
If you enjoyed this conversation with Lisa Mase, you may also enjoy some of the other episodes we've got coming up on Resilience Radio. You can subscribe via the podcatcher of your choice and get them delivered to you every week. You've been listening to Resilience Radio. I hope you enjoyed.